The carriage wheels ground against the muddy path with a sound like breaking bones, each rotation pulling Lanena Scarraven deeper into the Arkansas wilderness she had tried so desperately to forget. Through the rain-streaked window, the landscape stretched endlessly. Fields of withered cotton stalks bent like arthritic fingers and cypress trees that twisted toward the gray October sky, as if trying to claw their way out of the earth itself. Lena pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the surface. 3 years. 3 years since she had fled this place for the relative civilization of Little Rock, and now Tovian was dead, and she was returning to the only home the Ravencar name had ever known. "Miss, we're approaching the property," the driver called back, his voice tight with something that might have been fear or simple discomfort. Local folk had always been uneasy about the Raven Scar estate, though Eleanor had never understood why. Her family had lived on these lands for over a century, contributing to the community, trading fairly with neighboring farms. The carriage crested a small hill, and there it stood, Ravencar House. The 3-story mansion rose from the marshy ground like a monument to decay, its white paint peeling in long strips that hung like dead skin. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of years, and several of the shutters hung at odd angles, giving the windows the appearance of half-closed eyes. But it was the silence that struck her most forcefully. Even from this distance, even with the rain pattering against the carriage roof, and the horses snorting and stamping, the house seemed to exist in a pocket of absolute quiet. No birds sang in the ancient oaks that surrounded the property. No insects buzzed in the tall grass. Even the wind seemed to die as it approached the estate, as if the very air was reluctant to disturb whatever rested there. "This is as far as I go, miss," the driver said, pulling the horses to a stop at the rusted iron gate. His hands shook slightly as he climbed down to retrieve her trunk. "Your grandfather, he said someone would meet you here." Lena stepped down from the carriage, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture and the smell of decay. Not the clean decay of autumn leaves, but something older, more persistent, something that had been rotting for a very long time. "Thank you," she said, pressing a coin into the driver's palm. He pocketed it quickly and climbed back onto his seat without meeting her eyes. "Miss," he said, gathering the reins, "if you don't mind me saying, folks in town, they've been talking about your brother, about the circumstances." Lena's chest tightened. What circumstances? Tovian died of a fever. The telegram was quite clear. The driver's weathered face creased with something between pity and fear. "Yes, miss. That's what the telegram said." He clicked his tongue and the horses began to move. But fevers don't usually leave a man's bed empty and his window open to a second-story drop. Before Lena could respond, the carriage was already pulling away, leaving her alone at the gate with her trunk and a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with grief. The iron gate stood slightly ajar, its hinges silent despite their obvious age. Eleanor pushed it open wider, the metal cold even through her gloves, and dragged her trunk through. The gravel path that led to the house was overgrown with weeds, and her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. As she approached the front porch, the massive oak door swung open without a sound. Her grandfather, Sylvar Scarraven, stood in the doorway like a specter from another age. At 73, he remained tall and imposing, his white hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from the same weathered stone as the house itself. His pale blue eyes, once sharp as winter ice, now held a distant quality, as if he were seeing something just beyond the visible world. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years and secrets. "You've come home, grandfather." She climbed the porch steps, noting how they didn't creak despite their apparent age. Everything about this place seemed to exist in unnatural silence. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. The arrangements in Little Rock. Time moves differently here," Sylvar interrupted, stepping aside to let her enter. "What matters is that you're here now. The house has been waiting." The interior of Scarraven House was exactly as Lanena remembered, yet somehow different. The same heavy furniture dominated the rooms. The same portraits of long-dead ancestors lined the walls. The same Persian rugs covered the dark hardwood floors. But there was a quality to the air, a thickness that made each breath feel labored. The silence was even more pronounced inside, so complete that Lanena could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Where is everyone?" he asked, setting down her small traveling bag. "Mrs. Hartwell, the other staff." Silvar closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place unnaturally sharp in the quiet. "Gone," he said simply. "They left after Thomas. After the incident, superstitious folk, the lot of them." Lanena turned to study her grandfather's face. In the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains, his features seemed to shift and blur as if he were not quite solid. "Music grandfather, what really happened to Thomas?" "The driver said the driver talks too much." Silas moved past her toward the grand staircase, his footsteps making no sound on the wooden floor. "Come, I'll show you to your room. You'll want to rest before dinner." Lanena followed him up the stairs, her hand trailing along the banister that had been polished smooth by generations of Ravencar hands. The family portraits watched her ascent with painted eyes that seemed to track her movement. She recognized some of the faces from childhood stories. Great Aunt Cordelia, who had vanished during a thunderstorm in 1823. Uncle Matias, who had disappeared from his locked study in 1831. Cousin Rebecca, who had simply walked out of the house one morning in 1845 and was never seen again. So many missing faces. So many unexplained disappearances. How had she never noticed the pattern before? "Here," Silvar said, opening a door at the end of the hallway. "Your old room. I've had it prepared." The room was exactly as she had left it 3 years ago. The same pale blue wallpaper, the same white iron bed, the same view of the cypress swamp that stretched endlessly beyond the property. But like everything else in the house, it felt different now. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more substantial. The silence was so complete that Lanena found herself holding her breath. "Dinner is at 8, Silvar said from the doorway. "Don't wander the house after dark, child. The floors can be treacherous." Before Lanena could ask what he meant, he was gone, disappearing down the hallway with that same unnatural silence that seemed to follow him everywhere. Alone in her childhood room, Lanena sank onto the bed and tried to make sense of what she had walked into. Tovian was dead. That much was certain. But the circumstances surrounding his death, the empty house, her grandfather's cryptic warnings, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Outside her window, the cypress trees swayed in a wind she couldn't hear, their branches reaching toward the house like gnarled fingers. And somewhere in the walls around her, Lanena could swear she heard the faintest sound. Not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh, but something that might have been the house itself breathing. As the afternoon light faded and shadows began to creep across the floor, Lanena Scarraven realized that coming home might have been the most dangerous decision of her life. But by then, it was already too late to leave. The house had been waiting for her return, and now that she was here, it had no intention of letting her go. Lanena woke to absolute darkness and the sensation that something was watching her. The silence in Scarraven House was so complete, it felt like a physical presence pressing against her eardrums. She lay still, listening for any sound that might explain her sudden awakening, but heard nothing, not even the settling of old wood or the whisper of wind through the eaves. The luminous hands of her pocket watch showed 3:17 in the morning. She had slept for barely 4 hours since the uncomfortable dinner with her grandfather. A meal conducted in near silence while Silas stared at her with those pale, distant eyes and spoke only in cryptic fragments about the family's obligations and the house's needs. A soft sound from the hallway made her breath catch, the whisper of bare feet on wooden floors. Lanena sat up slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The footsteps paused outside her door, and she could swear she heard the faint sound of breathing, slow and deliberate. "Grandfather," she called softly. The breathing stopped. After a long moment, the footsteps resumed, moving away down the hallway with that same unnatural silence that seemed to follow everyone in this house. Alina slipped from her bed and pulled on her robe. Whatever was happening in Scarraven House, she needed answers, and she suspected they lay in the one place her grandfather had not shown her, Thomas's room. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, the family portraits nothing but dark shapes in the gloom. Lena moved carefully, her bare feet silent on the runner carpet, until she reached the door she remembered as Thomas's childhood room. The brass handle turned easily under her hand, and the door swung open without a sound. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting everything in shades of silver and black. The room was exactly as Tovian had left it. Bed unmade, clothes scattered across floor, books stacked haphazardly on the desk. But it was what she found on the windowsill that made her blood run cold. Scratches, deep gouges in the wooden frame, as if someone had clawed desperately at the wood. The window itself stood open, the curtains stirring in a breeze that carried the smell of stagnant water and decay from the swamp beyond. Lena approached the window carefully, her hands trembling as she examined the scratches. They were too deep and too deliberate to be accidental. Someone or something had fought desperately to escape through this window, but from what? A leather-bound journal lay open on Thomas's desk, its pages fluttering in the night breeze. Lena picked it up, squinting at her brother's familiar handwriting in the pale moonlight. October 10th, 1853. The dreams are getting worse. Every night I hear it calling from somewhere deep in the house. Mother's voice, but wrong somehow. Hollow. She's been dead for 15 years, but I swear I can hear her singing that old lullaby she used to hum when we were children. The one about the house that keeps its children safe. October 12th, 1853. Found something today. In the cellar behind the wine racks, a door I've never seen before, though I've lived in this house my entire life. Grandfather says it's always been there. But his eyes, there's something he's not telling me. Something about our family, about why so many of us simply vanish. October 15th, 1853. I understand now. The house isn't haunted, it's hungry, and it's been feeding on our family for generations. The portraits in the hallway, I counted them today, 37 faces, but I can only account for 12 deaths with proper graves in the family cemetery. Where are the other 25? What happened to them? October 18th, 1853. It's in the walls. I can hear it moving at night. Something large and patient, waiting for the right moment. Grandfather knows. He's always known. That's why he never leaves the house. Why he speaks in riddles. Why his eyes look like he's already dead. He's made some kind of bargain, some arrangement to keep it satisfied, but the arrangement is ending. I can feel it. October 20th, 1853. This will be my last entry. It came to me in a dream last night. Not Mother's voice this time, but the house itself, speaking in a language older than words. It showed me what lies beneath the foundation. What our ancestors built this place on top of. We're not the first family to live here. We're just the latest in a long line of offerings. The house doesn't protect its children. It devours them. If anyone finds this journal, know this. Lena must not come home. Whatever telegram you send, whatever story you tell, keep her away. The house is waiting for her. It's always been waiting for her. She's the last. And when she's gone, it will finally be satisfied. God forgive us all. Lena's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the journal. Tovian had known. Somehow he had discovered the truth about their family, about the house, and he had tried to warn her, but the telegram had already been sent, and she had already come home. A sound from downstairs made her freeze. The soft creak of a door opening, followed by footsteps that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. Alina clutched the journal to her chest and moved to the window, peering down at the grounds below. A figure stood in the garden, barely visible in the moonlight. Tall and thin, wearing what looked like a white nightgown that billowed around its form like grave clothes. As Lena watched, the figure raised its head and looked directly at her window. It was her mother. Impossible. Margaret Scarraven had died of consumption when Alina was 12 years old. She had watched them lower the coffin into the family plot herself, had stood in the rain as the preacher spoke words of comfort that felt hollow and meaningless. But there she stood exactly as Lena remembered her. The same dark hair, the same delicate features, the same gentle smile that had comforted her through countless childhood nightmares. The figure raised one pale hand and beckoned, its mouth moving as if singing a song Lena couldn't hear, the lullaby, the one Tovian had mentioned in his journal. Lena stumbled backward from the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Her mother was dead, buried in the family cemetery, nothing but bones and dust after 15 years in the ground. But as she watched, more figures began to emerge from the shadows around the house. Men and women in clothing from different eras, all bearing the distinctive features of the Raven Scar bloodline. Some she recognized from the portraits in the hallway. Others were strangers, their faces pale and hollow in the moonlight. All of them were looking at her window. All of them were beckoning. Lena backed away from the window. Thomas's journal clutched against her chest like a shield. She needed to find her grandfather, to demand answers about what was happening in this house. But as she turned toward the door, she found Silas standing in the doorway, his pale eyes reflecting the moonlight like a cat's. "You shouldn't be here, child," he said, his voice carrying a weight of infinite sadness. "Thomas's room is unsettled. Grandfather, what's happening? I saw outside in the garden. You saw what the house wanted you to see." Silvar stepped into the room, moving with that same unnatural silence. "It's testing you, Lena. Trying to understand what you know, what you're capable of." Alina held up the journal. Tovian knew, didn't he? He knew what this place really is. Silas's eyes fixed on the leather-bound book, and for a moment his composed facade cracked. Tovian was always too curious for his own good, too willing to dig where he shouldn't have dug. Is it true what he wrote about the house, about our family? Her grandfather was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the open window where the figures still stood in the garden below. "Every family has its burdens, Lena. Ours is simply older than most. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you." Silvar moved to the window and closed it with a soft click. Immediately, the figures in the garden began to fade, dissolving into the shadows like mist. "The house has rules, child. Ancient rules that must be followed if we're to survive." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Survive what? The hunger. Silas turned from the window, his face grave. "It's been patient for so long, content with the occasional offering. But patience has its limits and the house grows tired of waiting." "Offering?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "You mean the disappearances, the family members who vanished?" "They didn't vanish, child. They were chosen. Selected to feed something that has existed beneath this house since long before the first Raven Scar set foot on this land." Silas moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Your brother tried to break the cycle. He thought he could escape, could warn you away. But the house doesn't let go of what belongs to it." Lena followed him into the hallway, her mind reeling. "And what belongs to it, we do." Silvar's voice was flat, emotionless. "We always have. The land, the house, our bloodline. It's all connected, all part of the same ancient compact our ancestors made when they first settled here." "What kind of compact?" But Silas was already walking away, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. "Get some rest, Alina. Tomorrow I'll show you the cellar. It's time you understood your inheritance." Lena stood alone in the hallway, Thomas's journal heavy in her hands. Around her, the house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls breathing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could feel it watching her, evaluating her, deciding whether she was worthy of the same fate that had claimed so many of her family members. As she made her way back to her room, Lena realized that her grandfather's words carried a terrible implication. The house wasn't just hungry, it was selective, and for some reason it had been waiting specifically for her. The last raven scar, the final offering. The thought followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of voices calling from deep beneath the earth, and a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Ellen woke to the sound of rain against her windows and the smell of something burning. The acrid scent seemed to seep through the very walls of the house, carrying with it an undertone of decay that made her stomach turn. She dressed quickly, her hands still trembling from the previous night's revelations, and made her way downstairs. The main floor of Scarraven House felt different in the gray morning light. The shadows seemed deeper, more substantial, and the silence had taken on an expectant quality, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Lena found her grandfather in the kitchen, standing before the massive stone fireplace, where something that might once have been papers crackled and burned. "Good morning, child," Silas said without turning around. "I trust you slept well." Lena watched the flames consume what looked like photographs, their edges curling and blackening before dissolving into ash. "What are you burning?" "Memories." Silvar used an iron poker to stir the fire, ensuring nothing remained unburned. "Some things are better forgotten, like what happened to Thomas." Her grandfather's hand stilled on the poker. Tovian made his choice. He chose to fight rather than accept his place in the family legacy. Lena moved closer, trying to make out what remained of the burning materials. "And what choice am I supposed to make?" "The same one every raven scar has faced for 5 generations." Silas turned from the fire, his pale eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Accept your inheritance or join the others who tried to run." The casual way he spoke of it, as if the disappearance end. Death of family members were simply the cost of doing business, made Lena's blood run cold. "You're talking about murder, I'm talking about survival." Silas sat down the poker and moved to the kitchen table where a simple breakfast had been laid out. "Sit, Lena, eat. You'll need your strength for what I'm about to show you." Lena remained standing. "I'm not hungry." "You will be." Silas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "The house takes a great deal out of a person. Energy, vitality, hope. You'll find yourself constantly hungry here, constantly tired, as if something is slowly draining the life from your body because something is." "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air between them like a death sentence. "The question is whether you'll fight it like Tovian did or learn to work with it as I have." Elena sank into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly weak. "How long have you known about what this place really is?" Silvar poured coffee from a silver pot, his movements careful and deliberate. "I was about your age when my father showed me the cellar, 23 years old, fresh from university, full of ideas about progress and enlightenment." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I thought I could change things. Thought I could break the cycle through sheer force of will. But you didn't." "No." Silvar sipped his coffee, his eyes distant. "I learned, as every raven scar learns, that some things are older and stronger than human will. Some bargains once made cannot be broken." Lena felt a chill creep up her spine. "What bargain?" "The one our ancestor made in 1798 when he first built this house." Silvar set down his cup and looked directly at her. "Ezekiel Scarraven was a desperate man. Helena. He'd lost everything in a series of bad investments, faced debtor's prison or worse. When he came to Arkansas territory, he had nothing but a wagon, a sick wife, and a dream of starting over. And then he found something in the swamp, something old and patient and very, very hungry." Silas's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It offered him a deal. Prosperity for his family, protection from harm, success in all his endeavors in exchange for one simple thing." Lena's mouth was dry as dust. "What?" "A life. One member of each generation freely given to feed the thing that dwells beneath this house." Silas leaned back in his chair. Ezekiel thought he was clever. He thought he could cheat the bargain, find some way around it. But the thing beneath the house is patient. It waited until Ezekiel had built his fortune, raised his children, grown comfortable in his prosperity, and then it collected. His son, his eldest son, Marcus, vanished one night from his locked bedroom, leaving only scratches on the windowsill and the smell of swamp water. Silas's eyes were haunted. Ezekiel tried to leave, then tried to take his remaining family and flee, but the house wouldn't let them go. They made it as far as the gate before something dragged them back. Lena thought of the iron gate, standing slightly ajar despite its obvious weight. And since then, every generation has paid the price. Sometimes it's the eldest child, sometimes the youngest. Sometimes it chooses based on criteria we don't understand. But it always chooses, and it always collects. The kitchen fell silent except for the crackling of the dying fire. Lena stared at her grandfather, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling her. "You're saying our entire family has been farming people for over 50 years. I'm saying our family has been surviving." Silvar stood and moved to the window, looking out at the gray morning. "Do you know how many raven scars have died of natural causes in the last 5 decades? Lena, none, not one. We don't get sick. We don't age the way other people do. We don't suffer the misfortunes that plague other families. The house protects us, provides for us, ensures our prosperity in exchange for murder, in exchange for sacrifice." Silas turned back to her. "There's a difference." Lena felt bile rise in her throat. "How can you live with yourself? Because the alternative is worse." Silas's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've seen what happens to those who try to break the bargain, Elena. I've seen what the house does to those who refuse to honor the compact. Death would be a mercy compared to that fate." Before Lena could respond, Silas was moving toward the kitchen door. "Come, it's time you saw the cellar. Time you understood exactly what you've inherited." Lena followed him through the house, past the portraits of missing family members, down a narrow staircase she had never noticed as a child. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of decay grew stronger. By the time they reached the bottom, Lena could see her breath misting in the frigid air. The cellar was larger than she had expected, stretching beneath the entire foundation of the house. Wine racks lined the walls, lead with bottles covered in decades of dust. But it was the far wall that drew her attention, where the wine racks had been moved aside to reveal a door that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This is what Tovian found," Silas said, producing an ornate iron key from his pocket. "The entrance to the original foundation, to what was here before Ezekiel built his house." The key turned in the lock with a sound like breaking bones, and the door swung open to reveal a tunnel that descended into absolute darkness. The smell that wafted up from the depths was indescribable, not just decay but something older, more fundamental. The smell of things that had never been alive yet somehow existed. "What's down there?" Lena whispered. "The truth." Silas lit a lantern from a shelf beside the door. "The thing our family has been feeding for 5 generations. The source of our prosperity and the cause of our curse." Lena peered into the tunnel, her heart hammering against her ribs. The darkness seemed to move, to shift and writhe like a living thing. And from somewhere far below she could swear she heard the sound of breathing, slow, patient, and utterly inhuman. "I can't," she said, backing away from the door. "I can't go down there. You can, and you will." Silvar's voice was gentle but implacable. "Because you're the last, Lena, the last of the Raven Scar bloodline, and the thing below has been waiting for you specifically." "Why me?" Silvar smiled. And for the first time since her arrival, there was genuine warmth in his expression. "Because you're special, child. You always have been. The house has been patient, allowing the family line to continue, waiting for the right combination of bloodline and potential. Potential for what? To become something more than human." Silas held up the lantern, its light casting dancing shadows on the cellar walls. "The others who were taken, they were food, nothing more. But you're meant to be a partner, a bridge between what the house is and what it could become." Lena felt the world spinning around her. You're insane. Am I? Silvar stepped into the tunnel, the lantern light swallowed almost immediately by the darkness. Come, Lanena, it's time you met your inheritance. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Lanena followed her grandfather into the tunnel. The walls were carved from living rock, slick with moisture that felt warm to the touch. Strange symbols covered every surface, not carved, but somehow grown into the stone itself, pulsing with a faint phosphorescent light. The tunnel descended for what felt like miles, though Lanena knew it couldn't have been more than a few hundred ft. The breathing sound grew louder as they descended, accompanied by something that might have been a heartbeat, if hearts could beat that slowly. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern that stretched beyond the reach of their lantern light. The floor was covered in what looked like roots, thick, pale tendrils that pulsed with their own inner light. And at the center of the cavern, rising from the root-covered floor like a twisted tree, was something that defied description. It was massive, easily 30 ft tall. Its surface a writhing mass of what might have been flesh or bark, or something between the two faces pressed against its surface from within. Dozens of them all bearing the distinctive features of the Raven Scar bloodline. Their mouths moved in silent screams, their eyes wide with an agony that had lasted decades. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Silas said, his voice filled with something approaching reverence. The original inhabitant of this place, the thing that was here when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. It's been waiting so long for the right family, the right bloodline to help it grow. Lanena couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the horror before her. The faces in the creature's surface turned toward her, their mouths forming words she couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Help us, free us, don't let it take you too." The others fought, Silas continued, seemingly oblivious to Lena's horror. They resisted, tried to maintain their individual consciousness even as they were absorbed. But you don't have to fight, Alina. You can embrace what you're meant to become. Eleanor found her voice at last. "You're completely mad, mad." Silas laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the cavern. "I'm the best man alive, child. I've seen the future, seen what this creature can become with the right guidance. It doesn't want to destroy humanity. It wants to improve it, to create something better, stronger, more perfect than what we are now." The creature pulsed, and Lanena felt something brush against her mind. Alien thoughts, ancient hunger, and underneath it all, a loneliness so profound it made her weep. It had been alone for so long, feeding on scraps, waiting for someone who could understand its true nature. "It's dying," she whispered. "Yes," Silas nodded. "Without proper nourishment, without a true partner, it's slowly starving. That's why it needs you, Lanena. You're not just food, you're salvation." Alina backed toward the tunnel entrance, her mind reeling. "I won't do it. I won't let that thing absorb me. You don't have a choice." Silvar's voice was sad but final. "The house won't let you leave, Lanena. It's been preparing for this moment for over 50 years. Every door, every window, every possible escape route has been sealed. You can fight like Tovian did, but in the end you'll only make it harder on yourself." Alina turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the tunnel as she fled toward the surface. Behind her, she could hear Silvar calling her name, his voice mixing with something else, a sound like wind through dead leaves or the whisper of roots growing through soil. She burst into the cellar, slammed the door behind her, and raced up the stairs. But even as she ran, she could feel the house changing around her. The walls seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The floors shifted beneath her feet, and the very air grew thick and resistant, as if she were trying to run through water. By the time she reached the main floor, Lanena knew her grandfather had been telling the truth. The house wouldn't let her leave. She was trapped just as every Raven Scar before her had been trapped, caught in a web of ancient hunger and family obligation that stretched back over 5 decades. But unlike the others, Eleanor had seen the truth. She had looked into the face of the thing that had been feeding on her family, and she had seen its weakness. It was dying, and dying things, no matter how ancient or powerful, could be killed. The question was whether she could figure out how before it was too late. Alina spent the rest of the day searching the house for any means of escape, but her grandfather had spoken the truth. Every window was sealed shut with what looked like decades of paint and rust, but felt solid as iron beneath her hands. The doors, all of them, refused to open, their handles turning uselessly in her grip. Even the servants' entrances and the old root cellar access had been somehow sealed from the outside. As evening approached, the house began to change in ways that defied rational explanation. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. The floorboards beneath her feet grew warm, then hot, as if something massive was stirring beneath the foundation. And the silence, that oppressive, unnatural silence, began to fill with sounds that had no earthly source. Whispers in languages she didn't recognize. The soft scraping of something large moving through spaces too small to contain it. And underneath it all, a sound like singing. Dozens of voices raised in harmony, their words lost, but their anguish unmistakable. Lena found herself drawn back to Thomas's room as darkness fell. His journal lay where she had left it, open to that final desperate entry. She read it again by candle light, searching for any clue her brother might have left about how to escape their family's curse. The house doesn't protect its children. It devours them. But there had to be more. Tovian had discovered something in his final days, something that had driven him to attempt escape through his bedroom window. Lena searched the room methodically, checking every drawer, every hiding place she remembered from their childhood games of hide-and-seek. She found it tucked behind a loose board in the wall, a second journal smaller than the first, its pages filled with Thomas's increasingly frantic handwriting. October 21st. First Poravor continue Gerando Asuers, Terror. October 21st, 1853. I found the original contract hidden in grandfather's study behind a false panel. I discovered purely by accident. The document is written in Ezekiel's hand, but the signature isn't human. Music, it writhes on the page like a living thing, changing shape when I'm not looking directly at it. The terms are worse than I imagined. Not just one life per generation. That was merely the beginning. The creature has been growing stronger with each feeding, and now it wants more. It wants to merge with our bloodline completely to create something that is neither human nor whatever it is. Lena is the key. I don't understand why, but every reference in the contract points to her. The final daughter, it calls her, the bridge between worlds. Whatever that means, it's why the creature has been so patient. Why it's allowed our family to prosper for so long. It's been waiting for her. October 22nd, 1853. I tried to burn the contract today. The paper wouldn't catch fire. I tried to tear it, but it reformed itself before my eyes. Whatever power binds this agreement is beyond anything I understand. But there has to be a way to break it. There has to be. I've been reading about similar cases in the university library. Ancient. T-packs, blood contracts, demonic bargains. In every case, there's a weakness, a loophole, a way out for those clever enough to find it. October 23rd, 1853. Found it, the weakness. It's so simple I almost missed it. The contract specifies that the creature must be fed willingly given lives. Every raven scar who has been taken went to their fate, fighting, screaming, resisting until the end. But what if someone went willingly? What if they offered themselves freely without coercion or fear? The contract would be fulfilled, but not in the way the creature expects. A willing sacrifice has power that a forced one lacks. It could potentially break the cycle, destroy the creature, free our family from this curse, but it would mean death. True death, not the half-life of absorption that the others have suffered. Whoever makes this sacrifice would be gone forever. I'm not brave enough. God forgive me. I'm not brave enough to die for my family. But Lena has always been stronger than me, braver. If anyone could make this choice, it would be her. I have to warn her, have to tell her what's coming. But if I'm wrong, if my interpretation of the contract is incorrect, I'll be sending my sister to her death for nothing. October 24th, 1853. It's too late. I can feel the house calling to me, pulling me toward the cellar. The creature is hungry and it won't wait any longer. I tried to escape through the window, but something caught me, dragged me back. I can hear it in the walls now, moving toward my room. Alina, if you're reading this, know that I love you. Know that everything I did was to try to protect you. The contract is in grandfather's study behind the panel to the left of his desk. Find it. Read it. Understand what you're truly facing. And if you're brave enough, braver than I was, you might be able to end this, but only if you go willingly. Only if you choose your fate instead of having it chosen for you. The door is opening. I can smell the swamp. Feel the cold air from the cellar. It's coming for me. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm so sorry. The journal ended there. The final words smeared as if Tovian had dropped the pen in his haste to hide the book. Lena sat in the flickering candle light, her hands shaking as she processed what her brother had discovered. A willing sacrifice. Someone who chose to face the creature without fear, without resistance. It was insane, suicidal, but it might be the only way to break the cycle that had claimed so many of her family members. A sound from downstairs made her freeze, the soft creak of the cellar door opening. Lena blew out the candle and moved to the window, peering down at the garden below. The figures were there again, more of them than before. Their pale forms arranged in a perfect circle around the house. They stood motionless, watching, waiting. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, moving toward her room. Lena clutched Thomas's journal to her chest and tried to think. She needed to find the original contract, needed to understand exactly what terms bound her family to this nightmare. But first, she had to avoid whatever was coming for her. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The handle turned slowly and Lena held her breath, pressing herself against the wall beside the window. The door swung open with that same unnatural silence, and a figure stepped into the room. It was her grandfather, but wrong somehow. His movements were too fluid, too graceful for a man of his age. His eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's, and when he smiled, Lena could see that his teeth had grown longer, sharper. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "It's time. Time for what? To fulfill your destiny." Silas moved into the room, and Eleanor could see that his feet didn't quite touch the floor. The house has been patient long enough. The creature below grows weak from hunger, and it needs what only you can provide. Lena edged toward the door, but Silas moved to block her path with inhuman speed. "You can't run, child. There's nowhere to go. The house has sealed itself, and the grounds are watched by those who came before you. The others who were taken, they serve the house now as you will serve it, as I have served it for 50 years. Silas's form seemed to flicker, becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying again. "It's not death, Eleanor. It's transformation, evolution. You'll become part of something greater than any individual human could ever be." Lena thought of the faces she had seen pressed against the creature's surface, their mouths open in silent screams. That's not evolution. That's consumption. You don't understand because you haven't seen the full picture. Silas raised his hand, and Lena felt an invisible force pushing her toward the door. "Come, let me show you what you're truly meant to become." Lena fought against the compulsion, her feet sliding across the floor despite her efforts to resist. The journal fell from her hands, its pages scattering across the room. "No, I won't go down there again." "You will." Silvar's voice was no longer entirely human, "because you have no choice. The house has claimed you, Lena. You belong to it now, just as every raven scar has belonged to it since Ezekiel made his bargain." The invisible force grew stronger, lifting Lena off her feet and carrying her toward the hallway. She struggled, clawing at the doorframe, but her fingers found no purchase on the smooth wood. Behind her, she could hear the scattered pages of Thomas's journal rustling as they were swept up by an unfelt wind. "Don't fight it," Silas said as they moved down the hallway toward the stairs. "Fighting only makes it worse. Tovian fought, and look what happened to him." "What did happen to him?" Lena managed to gasp out the words despite the pressure around her throat. "He fed the house as you will feed it." but his resistance made the process unpleasant. The creature had to take him by force, and forced feeding is never as nourishing as willing sacrifice. They reached the main floor, and Lena could see that the house had changed again. The walls pulsed with veins of phosphorescent light, and the air was thick with the smell of growing things, not the clean scent of a garden, but the cloying sweetness of decay and rebirth. The portraits on the walls had changed, too. The painted eyes now tracked their movement, and some of the figures seemed to be trying to speak, their mouths moving soundlessly behind the glass. You see, Silas gestured to the transformed house around them. It's already beginning the merger between your world and the creature's realm. Soon there will be no distinction between the house and what lies beneath it, between the Scarraven family and the thing that has sustained us for so long. Alina felt the invisible force carrying her toward the kitchen, toward the cellar door that stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her. But as they passed the main staircase, she caught sight of something that made her heart leap. A loose banister post. Its base cracked and splintered from age. With all her strength, Lena twisted in the grip of the invisible force and grabbed the post. The old wood cracked further under her weight, but held long enough for her to swing her legs around and kick Silvar in the chest. The impact sent him staggering backward, and the force holding Lena vanished. She crashed to the floor, rolled, and came up running toward the front of the house. Behind her she could hear Silvar laughing, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "There's nowhere to run, child. The house won't let you leave." Lena reached the front door and threw herself against it, pounding on the wood with her fists. The door didn't budge, didn't even rattle in its frame. She tried the windows, but they were sealed as tightly as if they had been welded shut. "I told you," Silas said, appearing in the hallway behind her. His form flickered again, and for a moment Lena could see through him to the wall beyond. "The house protects what belongs to it." Alina backed away from him, her mind racing. She needed to find the contract Tovian had mentioned, needed to understand the exact terms of the bargain her ancestor had made. But first she had to get away from whatever her grandfather had become, the stairs. If she could reach the second floor, she might be able to barricade herself in Silvar's study long enough to find the hidden panel Tovian had written about. Lena feinted toward the kitchen, then spun and raced up the stairs. Behind her, Silas called out in that inhuman voice, but he didn't follow immediately. Perhaps whatever he had become couldn't move as quickly as a living human. She reached the second floor and ran down the hallway to her grandfather's study. The door was unlocked and Lena slipped inside, turning the key behind her. The room was exactly as she remembered from childhood. Heavy wooden furniture, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a massive desk that dominated the center of the space. Alina moved to the desk and began searching for the hidden panel Tovian had mentioned. Her fingers traced the wood grain, looking for any irregularity, any sign of a concealed compartment. Behind her, she could hear footsteps in the hallway, moving slowly but steadily toward the study. There, a section of paneling to the left of the desk that felt slightly different from the rest. Lena pressed against it, and a small section of the wall swung inward, revealing a cavity behind. Inside was a single document, its parchment yellow with age. Lena unfolded it carefully, squinting at the faded ink in the moonlight streaming through the study windows. The contract was exactly as Tovian had described, written in Ezekiel Ravencar's careful script, but signed with something that seemed to move and writhe on the page. As Lena read, her blood grew cold. The terms were worse than she had imagined. Not just one life per generation, but an escalating price. The creature had been patient, allowing the family to grow and prosper, but always with the understanding that eventually it would claim them all. The final clause made her stomach turn. When the bloodline has reached its fullest flowering, when the final daughter of the line has come of age, the compact shall be completed. She shall serve as the bridge between realms, allowing the Ancient One to walk freely in the world of men. In exchange for this service, The Raven Scar line shall be elevated beyond mortality, becoming eternal servants in the new order that shall rise from the ashes of the old. Lanena was the final daughter, the bridge between realms. Her willing participation wouldn't just feed the creature, it would allow it to escape the confines of the cellar to spread its influence beyond the boundaries of the house. The doorknob rattled behind her. "Eleanor," Silas called, his voice muffled by the wood. "Open the door, child. It's time to fulfill your purpose." Lena folded the contract and tucked it into her dress. Tovian had been wrong about one thing. A willing sacrifice wouldn't break the cycle, it would complete it, giving the creature everything it needed to transform the world into something unrecognizable. But he had been right about one thing. There was always a loophole in contracts like this, always a way out for those clever enough to find it. Eleanor just had to figure out what it was before the house claimed her, as it had claimed every Raven Scar before her. The door began to splinter behind her, and Lena knew her time was running out. The study door exploded inward with a sound like thunder, sending splinters of wood flying across the room. But it wasn't Silvar who stepped through the doorway. It was something that wore his face like a mask, its movements too fluid, too graceful for anything human. The thing that had once been her grandfather smiled with too many teeth, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of centuries. "You've read the contract," it said, gliding across the floor without seeming to move its feet. "Good. Now you understand what you truly are, what you've always been." Lena backed toward the window, the ancient parchment crumpling in her grip. "I understand that my family has been feeding a monster for 5 generations. Monster." The creature laughed, and the sound was like wind through a graveyard. "We are evolution, child. We are what humanity could become if it had the courage to transcend its limitations. By consuming people, by turning them into screaming faces trapped in living flesh, by offering them immortality." The creature moved closer, and Lena could see that its form was becoming less stable, flickering between Silvar's familiar features and something far more alien. "Death is the great enemy, Lena. We offer victory over death itself." Lena felt the window glass against her back and realized she had nowhere left to retreat. "That's not victory. That's slavery, is it?" The creature tilted its head, studying her with eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "Tell me, child, what have you accomplished in your 23 years? What mark have you left on the world? What legacy will you leave behind when your brief human life ends?" The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. Lena had lived a sheltered life, protected by her family's wealth, never truly tested or challenged. She had no great achievements to her name, no lasting contributions to the world. But with us, the creature continued, you could be part of something eternal, something that will reshape the world, that will guide humanity into a new age of prosperity and power. Under your control, under our guidance. The creature extended one hand toward her, and Lena could see that its fingers were too long, too pale, ending in nails that looked more like claws. "Join us willingly, Lena. Become the bridge between worlds. Help us bring order to the chaos of human existence." Lena looked down at the contract in her hands, reading the faded words by moonlight. There had to be something she was missing, some detail that Tovian hadn't understood. Ancient contracts like this always had loopholes, ways for the clever to escape their bonds. And then she saw it. A single line near the bottom of the document written in smaller script than the rest. Should the final daughter refuse her destiny, should she choose death over transformation, the compact shall be void, and the ancient one shall return to the depths from whence it came. Lena's heart raced as she understood what she was reading. The creature needed her willing participation to complete its plan. If she refused, if she chose death over serving as its bridge between worlds, the entire contract would be nullified. The creature would lose its hold on the house, on her family, on everything it had built over 5 generations. But it would mean her death. True death, not the half-life of absorption that had claimed the others. "I can see you thinking, child," the creature said, moving closer, "but there is no escape. The house is sealed, the grounds are watched. You cannot run, you cannot hide. Your only choice is to embrace your destiny or be taken by force." Elinor looked up from the contract, meeting the creature's inhuman gaze. "You're wrong. I have a third choice." Before the creature could react, Elinor spun and drove her elbow through the study window. Glass exploded outward in a shower of glittering fragments, and cold night air rushed into the room. The creature lunged toward her, but Lena was already moving. She climbed onto the windowsill, feeling the sharp glass cut through her dress and into her skin. Below her, the ground was 20 ft down, far enough to break bones, possibly far enough to kill. But that was exactly what she needed. Lena, no. The creature's voice had lost its inhuman harmonics, becoming purely Sylvar's terrified cry. "You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly." Lena looked back at the thing that wore her grandfather's face. "The contract requires the willing participation of the final daughter. But if the final daughter dies before she can participate, the contract is void. You'll die for nothing. The house will simply wait for another bloodline, another family to make the same bargain." Lena smiled, feeling a strange peace settle over her. "Maybe, but it won't be my family, and that's enough." She jumped. The fall seemed to last forever, the ground rushing up to meet her with terrible inevitability. Lena closed her eyes and thought of Thomas, of all the family members who had been consumed by the creature's hunger. At least their sacrifice would mean something now. At least their deaths would not be in vain. She hit the ground with a sickening crack, pain exploding through her body like lightning. But she was still conscious, still alive. The fall had broken her legs, possibly her back, but it hadn't killed her outright. Above her, the creature appeared at the broken window, its form writhing with rage and desperation. "It's not too late," it called down to her. "I can heal you, make you whole again, just accept the bargain." Lena tried to speak, but found she could only whisper. Blood filled her mouth, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each heartbeat. "No," she managed to say. "I choose death." The creature let out a wail that seemed to come from the earth itself. A sound of such anguish and fury that it shattered every remaining window in the house. The building began to shake, its walls cracking and crumbling as the thing beneath it thrashed in its death throes. Lena felt the contract in her hand beginning to burn, the ancient parchment dissolving into ash that was carried away by the wind. As it disappeared, she could hear other sounds, the voices of her family members crying out in joy and relief as they were finally freed from their torment. The house continued to collapse, its foundation cracking as the creature below writhed and died. Lena watched the destruction with fading vision, knowing that she had succeeded. The cycle was broken. The curse was ended. Her family was free. As darkness closed in around her, Lena heard footsteps approaching across the grass. She turned her head with tremendous effort and saw a familiar figure kneeling beside her, Thomas, looking exactly as he had in life, his face filled with love and gratitude. "You did it," he whispered, taking her hand. "You saved us all." Behind him, other figures were emerging from the collapsing house. Generations of raven scars finally free from their torment. They gathered around Elinor, their faces peaceful for the first time in decades. "It's time to go," Tovian said gently. "Time to rest." Lena nodded, feeling the pain in her body beginning to fade. She had made her choice, and she was at peace with it. The creature was dead, the contract was void, and her family was free. It was enough. As the last of her strength left her, Lanena Ravencar closed her eyes and let herself be carried away into the light, knowing that she had chosen her fate instead of having it chosen for her. And in that choice, she had found the courage to break a cycle of horror that had lasted for 5 generations. Behind her, Ravencar House collapsed into ruin, taking with it the last remnants of an ancient evil that would never again prey upon the innocent. The swamp began to reclaim the land. Cypress trees growing up through the broken foundation, covering the scars left by decades of unnatural habitation. By morning, there was nothing left but a pile of rotting timber and a family cemetery, where the last raven scar lay at peace, surrounded by the graves of those she had died to save. The silence that settled over the ruins was different from the oppressive quiet that had once characterized the house. This was the natural silence of the wilderness, broken by the songs of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. It was the silence of peace, of evil defeated, of a curse finally broken. And in that silence, the spirits of the Raven Scar family found the rest they had been denied for so long. Their sacrifice finally given meaning by the courage of one young woman who chose death over damnation, freedom over slavery, and love over fear. The house that had devoured its own was gone forever, and the world was a little bit safer for its passing.